There's something haunting about watching Paul George play basketball. Every move looks effortless, every shot seems destined to fall, and every play flows like water. But here's the thing that keeps NBA fans up at night. For all his smoothness, for all his undeniable talent, Paul George might just be the most gifted almost in basketball history. And after his disastrous first season in Philadelphia, that conversation is getting louder than ever. Picture this, a 6'8" wing who can pull up from 30 feet like he's shooting layups, defend multiple positions without breaking a sweat, and make the most difficult shots look routine. That's Paul George when he's locked in. But for every moment of brilliance, there's a ghost of what could have been haunting his legacy. The question isn't whether PG-13 has game, it's whether having all the tools in the world means anything if you can't build the house. Let's talk about that smoothness first, because it's legitimately mesmerizing. When Paul George gets into his rhythm, defenders know exactly what's coming and still can't stop it. That step-back three-pointer, pure poetry in motion. The way he elevates over smaller guards, textbook basketball artistry. Even his misses look good. And that might be part of the problem. George has this rare ability to make everything look easy, which creates this weird paradox where his best performances almost feel inevitable, but his worst ones feel shocking. You watch him drain 5 straight threes against the Lakers in a playoff game, and you think, of course he did that. Then you watch him go 2 for 16 in an elimination game, and you're left wondering how the same player who looked unstoppable 20 minutes ago suddenly looks lost. But that's only part of the Paul George story. The real heartbreak comes when you look at his almost moments, those times when greatness was literally within reach but somehow slipped through his fingers like sand. Remember the 2013 Eastern Conference Finals? George had the Miami Heat on the ropes, pushing LeBron's super team to 7 games with the young Indiana Pacers squad that had no business being there. For a moment, it looked like he might be the one to dethrone the king. That series was Paul George's coming out party on the biggest stage. He was fearless, taking and making impossible shots, going toe-to-toe with LeBron James like he belonged in that conversation. Game after game, he proved he wasn't just another promising young player. He was a legitimate superstar in the making. And then Game 7 happened, and the Heat pulled away, and suddenly PG was left with moral victories instead of championship rings. The Oklahoma City chapter should have been different. Teaming up with Russell Westbrook after Kevin Durant bolted for Golden State, George had another legitimate shot at a title. The Thunder had the talent, they had the hunger, and they had Paul George playing some of the best basketball of his career. He was averaging over 21 points per game, shooting the lights out from deep, and looking like the missing piece that could finally solve the Warriors puzzle. But here's where things get wild. Injuries struck at the worst possible time, chemistry issues bubbled up, and what should have been a championship run became another what-if story. George played well, but not well enough. The team was good, but not good enough. It's like the basketball gods decided that Paul George was destined to be really, really good at being almost great. Then came the Clippers era. And this is where the Paul George narrative gets really interesting. Paired with Kawhi Leonard, this was supposed to be his moment. 2 elite two-way wings who could score, defend, and carry a team when it mattered most. The basketball world held its breath expecting this dynamic duo to challenge the Lakers and finally bring Paul George the championship that had been eluding him his entire career. Instead, we got 4 years of injury reports, load management controversies, and playoff disappointments that felt worse because the expectations were so high. George would have stretches where he looked absolutely dominant. Remember that bubble performance against the Mavericks where he looked like prime Kevin Durant? But then he'd follow it up with performances that left everyone scratching their heads. The most frustrating part about Paul George's Clippers tenure wasn't the injuries or the inconsistency, it was how good he looked when everything was working. In those moments, you could see exactly why teams kept betting big money and big expectations on him. The man can flat out play basketball at an elite level. But championship teams need their stars to be great when it matters most. In PG's, timing has been absolutely brutal throughout his career. And here's where things get really interesting. Philadelphia was supposed to be his redemption story. The 76ers offered him a 4-year, $212 million contract. And Maxi's explosive scoring ability should have created matchup nightmares for every team in the Eastern Conference. Instead, we witnessed one of the most disappointing superstar debuts in recent memory. George missed the first 5 games of the season with a knee injury, a preview of things to come. When he finally took the court, he looked like a shell of himself. The shot wasn't falling, the confidence seemed shaken, and the chemistry with his new teammates was practically non-existent. The numbers tell the story better than any highlight reel could. Paul George, the same player who averaged over 23 points per game just 2 seasons ago, was putting up 16.3 points per game on shooting splits that would make a rookie blush. For a player getting paid superstar money to be the missing piece for a championship contender, those numbers represent more than just a bad season. They represent a crisis of identity. But wait, it gets worse. The injuries kept piling up game after game. George would look good for a quarter, then disappear for stretches that left 76ers fans wondering if they just witnessed the most expensive mistake in franchise history. The smoothness that made him special seemed to work against him. He'd make difficult shots look so easy that when he missed, it felt like a betrayal of his own talent. Here's the kicker though, even while George was struggling, you could still see flashes of the player who earned 9 All-Star selections and multiple All-NBA honors. There'd be a sequence where he'd drain a contested 3, grab a steal on the other end, and push the ball in transition for an easy assist. And for about 30 seconds, you'd remember why everyone got so excited about him coming to Philadelphia in the first place. The problem is that championship teams need their stars to string those 30-second flashes together for entire games, entire series, entire playoff runs. And that's where Paul George's story becomes legitimately heartbreaking. He has all the physical tools, all the basketball IQ, and all the experience you could want in a superstar. But something about the biggest moment seems to bring out his worst tendencies, instead of his best ones. Now the trade rumors are swirling. And honestly, can you blame the 76ers for listening? They invested massive money and championship hopes in Paul George. And what they got that was a player who looked genuinely uncomfortable in his own skin. The smoothness that defined his game for over a decade seemed to abandon him right when Philadelphia needed it most. And here's what makes this whole situation so fascinating. Paul George isn't washed up, he isn't lacking talent, and he isn't lacking effort. He's a victim of expectations that might have been impossible to meet from the very beginning. When you're smooth enough to make everything look effortless, people start expecting perfection. When you're talented enough to go toe-to-toe with the best players in the world, anything short of a championship feels like failure. The cruel irony of Paul George's career is that his greatest strength might also be his biggest weakness. That smoothness that makes him so enjoyable to watch also makes his struggles feel more jarring. When a player who looks like he's gliding on ice suddenly starts stumbling, it's not just disappointing, it's shocking. Think about the great champions in NBA history. Michael Jordan had that killer instinct that made him rise to the occasion. LeBron James had that physical dominance that allowed him to impose his will. Kobe Bryant had that Mamba mentality that refused to accept defeat. Paul George has smoothness. And while that's beautiful to watch, it doesn't always translate to the gritty, grinding moments that define championship runs. But here's the thing that keeps this conversation interesting. Paul George's story isn't over yet. At 34 years old, he's definitely in the twilight of his career, but he's not done. The question is whether he can find a way to channel that smoothness into the kind of impact that actually moves the championship needle. Can he be the complementary star that helps someone else win a title? Can he find the right situation where his skills fit perfectly with what the team needs? The Philadelphia experiment was supposed to answer those questions, but instead, it raised even more. If Paul George can't make it work alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey in a system designed to maximize his strengths, then where exactly can he make it work? The trade rumors suggest that even the 76ers are starting to wonder if they bet on the wrong horse. And that brings us to the legacy question that defines Paul George's entire career. What's the difference between being really, really good and being truly great? On any given night, PG can look like a top 5 player in the world. His shot-making ability is elite, his defensive versatility is valuable, and his basketball IQ is underrated. But champions aren't made on any given night. They're made over the course of 7-game series, 4 playoff rounds, and the pressure-packed moments where legends separate themselves from everyone else. Paul George has had those moments throughout his career, but he's also had the other moments. The ones where the smoothness becomes passivity, where the effortless style becomes disconnected from the intensity the game demands. Championship basketball is often ugly, grinding, and emotional. It rewards players who can find extra gears when their first gear isn't working. And that might be where Paul George's beautiful game becomes a limitation rather than an asset. The current reality is stark and unforgiving. After 1 season in Philadelphia, Paul George is already being discussed as trade bait rather than the cornerstone player. The Big Three experiment failed before it really got started, and now the 76ers are facing serious questions about whether they can salvage anything from their massive investment. For George, it's another chapter in a career full of almosts, what-ifs, and really good seasons that somehow don't add up to greatness. But maybe that's okay. Maybe not every supremely talented player needs to win championships to validate their career. Maybe being the smoothest almost legend is its own kind of achievement. Paul George has given NBA fans over a decade of highlight reel plays, clutch shots, and moments of pure basketball artistry. He's made all-star teams, earned all-NBA honors, and commanded respect from his peers throughout his career. The tragedy isn't that Paul George never won a championship. It's that his smoothness made us believe he should have won multiple championships. When you make difficult things look that easy, people start expecting you to make impossible things look easy too. And that's a standard that might be unfair to any player, no matter how talented they are. As trade rumors continue to swirl and the 76ers contemplate their next move, Paul George finds himself at a crossroads that feels familiar. Once again, he's the talented star whose future is uncertain, whose next move will determine whether he gets another shot at the title that has eluded him for so long. The smoothness is still there, the talent is still there, but the window might be closing faster than anyone wants to admit. Here's the final brutal truth about Paul George's career. He might go down as the most talented player to never win a championship since Charles Barkley. And just like Barkley, the lack of rings won't erase the incredible individual moments, but it will always be the first thing people mention when they talk about his legacy. For a player who made everything look so smooth, so effortless, so inevitable, that's the roughest ending of all. The smoothest almost legend. It's a title that captures both the beauty and the heartbreak of Paul George's NBA journey. And as he faces an uncertain future in Philadelphia or wherever he lands next, that phrase might be the most accurate summary of one of the most frustrating and fascinating careers in modern basketball history.